Welcome to the third installment of the Boise Metro Chamber of Commerce's Higher Education series. I'm Kevin Richert. I'm the senior reporter at Idaho Education News, and I'm moderating this series of conversations. It's been a really good chance for us to talk to leaders in the education community and give you a sense of education issues facing the state. The series is made possible through the sponsorship of series sponsor Sparklight.
What is great internet? Is it strong? Is it fast? Is it reliable? At Sparklight, we know connection goes way beyond technology. From Monday morning meetings to Friday nights with friends and everything in between. That the best connections are always there, right when you need them. So how do you know it's great internet? Because it works. We're Sparklight, and we're always working for you.
Joining us today for the third installment of the series is Gordon Jones, the president of the College of Western Idaho. President Jones, thank you for joining us. I usually have about 3 hours worth of questions for you whenever we get together. We only have an hour. There's a lot to get to. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. But let's start with the basics here. So you're a few weeks into the fall semester. How are things going so far? Any surprises so far this semester?
First of all, thanks, Kevin, for having me, and I appreciate the chance to spend this time with you and those who are listening. I always appreciate the chance to chat about higher education and overall, and then more specifically CWI. Our fall, for those that are less familiar, CWI, we're entering our 15th academic year, so we're very young as a public. Primarily 2-year community college. That's our origin story, and it'll continue to be much of who we are. But we're quite large. We are last year surpassed 31,000 unique learners who pursue programs or classes of all kinds, and they're at all ages. And the story, sort of to your question of this fall, I mean, it's a continuation of, I think, people's expanding interest in what 2-year public community colleges like ours can offer them. And so certainly, I'm not sure surprised, but maybe what's new, we are seeing continued growth in our enrollments. We are back to our youth. We're in the process, interestingly, for some people, we're actually building a campus. We have several buildings in primarily Nampa. We have land in Boise. We have a property out by the Caldwell-Nampa border. But we've been very under infrastructured, which is kind of different than many people's thoughts of higher ed. But with that many learners and such a rapid growth, we've kicked off our capital campaign with the community in a public-facing way. We have about $138 million of construction going on that we're committing to. That is really an exciting opportunity for our students to get that first-rate teaching space and still maintain our affordable open access model. Other things, we do officially now have a mascot. We are the Otters. With a look, we've always been the Otters for the last few years since I've been there, but we have a look, we have a mascot. It's a great time to come get your gear. I joked some folks that officially I did want to announce, though, we are not a part of the Pac-12. So, okay. Which is extra funny because we actually don't have athletics. And so hopefully those that were watching are having a chuckle. But enrollment's up.
You're the Mountain West, though.
Yeah, that's right. Who knows? We or at least our debate team. We do have a national program in debate, and we're very proud of those debating Otters. But in terms of what's new, enrollment's up. We have a campus that's being grown, and we're always trying to add to our personality with, for example, this mascot launch. So that would be what I would point to for now.
Well, and I want to talk more about the infrastructure and the development of the campus. I want to spend some time on that later, but I want to stick with enrollment just for a couple of minutes here because you're right. This shouldn't be a surprise. I mean, this has been a college that has been growing and growing and growing over its 15 years. Are there any developments this fall that are different or continuation of what you've seen in the past? I mean, where's the growth coming from here?
Well, I do think to give some folks some context, we're up. It looks like our numbers roll in. We do 5 different sort of areas of education. We do dual credit with high school students. We have students who are often traditional age, looking to get an AA degree. We have people doing career technical education. We have adult learners doing programs like English as a second language. And then we have sort of employers with employees looking to CWI to augment their professional training. So some of those numbers roll in at different times, but the numbers around our transfer and our career technical, the AA and the career technical education, we're up about, looks like somewhere between 8.5% and 9% this fall on our student populations for those segments, which are quite large segments for us. I think it's a story of a couple things. One is, community colleges like CWI, we are truly very affordable. And we all know the rising cost of living in the Valley. And wherever a place like a CWI can offer that affordability, I think many families will say, gosh, if I'm looking for something that might be a direct training to employment, or it's just a lower cost approach to becoming a junior in college, we're finding people are very interested in that. I think structurally with some public policy, Idaho Launch has been a program that our state legislature has approved that enables every graduating high school senior to access $4,000 a year over 2 years, a total of $8,000, to go towards majors at the 2 or 4 year world that tie to employment. And that is a significant reduction in cost for many of our students. And so I do think that's a big piece of this fall's bump, but that's also set upon a canvas of tremendous affordability at the 2 year level. So both of those are working as wins that get people interested in what we're doing. So those would be the two that I would say most drive some of that growth right now. I think there's lots we're doing around programs and opportunities, but those two are the biggest levers right now.
And the growth kind of comes at an interesting time because usually colleges in general, and especially 2 year colleges, it's kind of counterintuitive. Your enrollment numbers are, they tend to increase when the economy is slower. People go back to school to develop new job skills. And the enrollment growth tends to slow when the economy is good. I mean, we're in a strong economy and you're still seeing enrollment growth.
Yeah, it is. You're calling out that traditional sort of recognition higher ed has had about when people turn to us and when sometimes it's more compelling for them to be in that labor market or out working. I do think with COVID, you've got some other variables. A lot of people are looking for flexibility and this idea that you might be able to kind of do both. Work and continue either preparing yourself for the next job or enhancing your current prospects. CWI we're designed for a lot of flexibility more than some other places. For example, many of our programs will teach well into the evening. We have classes that'll start in the evening and allow people who may be working. We start many classes every 8 weeks, which allows, as opposed to your traditional semester model, where if you don't get in by August 20th, you're not starting till January. Right. In our case, we have another start in between that. So some folks are able to sort of fit in education around some of that employment. So when the economy's good, that may be variables that we look at. That may be variables that drive some of that counterintuitive behavior, so to speak. I do think there are certain fields, though, that people are looking at where real shortages in healthcare or some of the trades. We've read about how some of the trades are falling back. People are falling back in love with them in terms of, wow, this is really a viable way where technology, you've seen some slowdown. You've seen Silicon Valley firms kind of laying off tech workers. And I think a lot of people are looking at a world of AI and others saying, wait a minute, what's recession proof? What's AI proof? Some of those trades that schools like CWI really specialize in, those could be other factors that are also weighing in on the growth while the economy is still good dynamic you've described.
You mentioned launch, and I wanted to drill down into launch a little bit more. This is the first fall for students to be going to school with the launch grants. What are you seeing in terms of how many launch students do you have right now at CWI, and what kind of programs are they pursuing?
So at a high level, and I'm going to quote some numbers that may be time stamped or a bit dated even now. We're here in October of 24, but the last I had checked in at a state level, we were looking at about 9,150 high school graduates who had were going to benefit from Idaho launch grants. At CWI, we have attributed I want to say about 850 students, give or take. You can't. I want the listeners to know I'm trying to do this off memory, and there's a lot that crams into my brain here, so I may be off by a plus or minus maybe 10% here, but it's in that order of magnitude. Launch is designed for certain majors. The legislature and our Workforce Development Council have identified those majors. Many of them are all of them are designed to be. Many of them are in things that you think of as trade-driven, healthcare. There are other majors around business and technology and other fields. But so to answer your question, they're in those fields. That's what qualifies them, and that's what they were vetted for, students who indicated that interest.
So some of the really popular programs are nursing, welding seem to be
now
keep coming up in the conversation about launch.
This is an audience, I'm assuming, that's interested enough to, some of that nuance or things we have to now navigate is, we do have waiting lists. We're 100% open access institution, meaning we're prepared to accept you. The only instances where we can't is if we just don't have any seats available, or if you may want to be a nurse, but you need to take some science classes to get you there. We'll get you into those classes. But the nursing, welding are two programs in particular where I know we do have waiting lists because we just don't have seats. And so in those instances, we are having to ask students to either hold on or while we work to try to create more seats. But to answer your question, we think it's around 850, give or take. And they are all in these areas that do prove out to have jobs and demand, labor demand, as identified by our Department of Labor and Workforce Development Council.
And that capacity, you talked about. I remember back in the summer when legislators were on the campus and you had them tour around, and launch came up, and how you accommodate this surge of students that are looking to use their launch money for programs at CWI. You can do a lot in terms of trying to add classes around the day, but there's only so much you can do. I mean, you can't have the welding lab run at 3 a.m. or something like that. I mean, are you in a position where you need to add facilities or add staff or both to handle this growth?
Yeah, and I want people listening to understand. I mean, we'll do everything we can to fit as many people as are appropriate. We work with our faculty to make sure that we think that quality is maintained. But there are limitations that are beyond, a president's control. For example, some of our healthcare classes around nursing, there are certifying bodies. You can't become a nurse without conforming or passing these certifying bodies exams or criteria. And some of those are prescribing the student to teacher ratio. So I believe off the top of my head, it was like 15 students to every instructor in nursing. We can't exceed that. I cannot put 16 students in that classroom and have that be a certifiable class. And so you and I and many of these listeners or audience members will recognize that's a math challenge. We need to hire more staff. Welding is an example where you need these individual bays, individual stalls to do your welding. It's a safety requirement, and it's a requirement. We only have a certain number of those, and so we can't put more people in those. And so we need both the teaching space in some cases where we have these large wait lists and instructors. And the two-year schools are really good at affordability, but what you want to underappreciate in that is we're also very lean. That is a definition of what makes us affordable. And so sometimes people think that, oh, well, you can just, you must have the money somewhere. And I will assure you that in the landscape of higher ed, there is no leaner environment than our two-year schools. And so we do need to turn to either our private community to see who might be motivated to help fund that, or we turn back to our public elected officials and say, help these policies be realized. And I assure you that from a taxpayer standpoint, there is no more affordable option than our 2 years in terms of building that capacity. So you're not going to find it cheaper is the shorthand way of saying it. And I know that we're a state that really cares about fiscal discipline, but I also know that these are in-demand jobs. We believe at CWI, schools like ours, we power the Treasure Valley. The programs we do are highly correlated to employment and needed employment, from construction to public safety to healthcare to ag and horticulture. These are areas that are going to have direct and immediate impact and benefit to our graduates. So we do need, while we're excited there's more students coming and these are great public policy, I think it's going to help fuel our economy. We do need the infrastructure, meaning the teaching space and teachers, to be there. And in some cases, we've identified those gaps.
And you brought up a point I wanted to drill down into a little bit further, especially, given that we've got business people in the audience watching this. The business folks are watching the launch program and are hoping that this is going to provide employees down the road to fill some of these jobs that are hard to fill. What is the role of the business community in terms of supporting CWI and supporting the higher education system to help launch work better? I mean, is there a role you want to see the business community play in terms of, the startup of this program?
Yeah, I mean, my answer may be even broader based than that, and I'm happy to have you, Kevin, either interrupt me or refine it both based on my answer. But I've been in the private sector the first half of my career. I think we have to be careful when we are working together to recognize that there's often gaps between how we speak and think and our expectations for each other. I grew up in the 70s, and I happened to have some exposure in my youth to that private sector world. And, any others listening would recognize that these were eras, the 50s, 60s, and 70s, where employers really looked for higher ed to provide educated individuals, but often the finishing school happened at the employer. That training, the understanding of how a accounting firm might work, it could be a sales position, it could be anything. Employers often funded that. Now, the game has changed because we've seen that now careers are a jungle gym and people are moving faster. Companies have a harder time justifying investment in any one individual. But the default of that is there's been this growing expectation that higher ed needs to kind of create a pre-prepared individual. And that's worked in the trades, that's worked in career technical education to some extent, because I think employers have still turned to schools, but sentiment and support is really important in advocacy. But I think it would be a collectively valuable experience if we really reflected on how much funding we as private sector employers want to put towards higher ed, and see if we can produce that result that you're looking for. But the idea that the state is going to single-handedly fund these things, I think is a little bit of a stretch, if not a lot of a bit of a stretch, to be realistic and tactful. I do think our employer community is very supportive of higher ed, but sometimes we're going to probably need to be turning to each other in greater ways. Now, our job on our side is to understand that that private sector really believes in accountability, not effort. trying hard when the company is giving you several $1,000,000 is insufficient in the private sector world to gain confidence to do that. That's not how they operate. They don't win customers when they try hard. They win when they deliver. Mm-hmm. And we in the higher ed world need to reflect on where our pivots may need to occur. But so I want to be clear, I think it's a two-way street. But to put it shorthand, yeah, I think we're in an era where our private sector may need to reflect on, are we really putting the money where our sentiment is? And on the flip side, we have room to do to make sure we're delivering on that for those. So I hope I'm not being controversial. I think we're a community that always wants to support each other. And so I feel great about launch. I've appreciated the advocacy, but doesn't mean I can produce more welders or nurses just based on that advocacy, as you've listened to my prior answer.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me ask more broadly. You talked a little bit about your background. In your background, it's a very varied resume, not just within private public sector, but within education. I mean, you've gone from 4-year schools now to running a 2-year college. I mean, that was a very conscious career move on your part, I'm sure. And what attracted you to the community college sector, and what's attractive to you about community colleges within the broader framework of higher ed?
Yeah, I love this question, and just for everyone listening, this is an original question to me. I'm not pre-primed necessarily, but my background, I've always had a foot in education, even when I was in the private sector. I started my post-college career actually as a high school teacher in rural Arizona, and returned to higher education mid-career. I've really had the privilege to be up close on the inside of elite universities, being at Harvard for 5 full-time years and 3 to 4 more on the side before I went in full-time, and at Boise State for 7 years as a dean and in the academic arena, and here at CWI. And I think for listeners, I mean, what really motivates me is I have always been interested in where is public higher ed headed, and what is really our obligation to society, and are we really perfectly fulfilling it in a time of rapid change where adaptation is it's pretty hard to believe that we don't need to evolve. There's just been so many changes, from how learning is consumed to the technologies to things we've happened, affordability. And this is really the common theme in my career, I think, is trying to marry contemporary view on organizations and try to have the patience to invite people on that journey to let's go do that change together. I don't think that there's another way that's a successful strategy. Now, within that, why 2-year? Because I believe that one of the hallmarks of public higher ed has been that affordability has always been integral to the idea that public higher ed helps do social and economic mobility. That's a standard term that if you understand public higher ed, it's always been a place where anybody in this country, it's a special, unique aspect to this country compared to others, where we really have built a model where, higher ed is accessible to everyone. But the premise has historically been on high affordability since post-World War II, and the idea that you could access employment that went beyond your family of origin. And what's concerned me is I think that some parts of public higher ed are starting to get to levels of unaffordability that they're starting to look more like luxury priced services. And they're really hard for, we've historically grown up, my generation and yours, Kevin, is the single greatest way to de-risk our life is to go to college. And many listeners, they still believe that's how we were, that was what it was. I believe today, many parts of our public, the majority, it's not clear to me that they believe higher ed is a de-risking strategy. It's actually more risk in some cases. And so 2 years to me, the community colleges have been very strong stalwarts at retaining affordability, how much you pay. They are almost universally the single most affordable place to turn in your state. And I'm thinking more broadly than just Idaho. And so my question I asked is, if I were to be CWI, when I look at CWI and this privilege to be president, what if we took that preserved affordability, a commitment to employment as a justifiable, perfect outcome that most people, 90% on many surveys say if people going to higher ed want that employment outcome that leads to a career orientation. What if we brought more strategy, fitness, discipline, many of the attributes that you'll find in that have not always been present in some of our community college arenas? The lean models kind of prevented them from maybe getting liftoff. And if we were to do that, could we bring that benefit to even more people? And I look here in this community at CWI, we're young. We're already the largest community college, depending on how you count students. You would argue we're the largest in the state among our publics in terms of unique people, right up there with Boise State. But we're going to grow. And I think affordability is going to be present as an issue that has to be addressed. And I believe higher ed has to provide its own solutions. There's no rescue boat coming. And so it's all incumbent on us to come up with those. So it's a long-winded answer, but I loved how you said it's a very deliberate move, because I always like to say I started at Harvard, and you'll notice my hand goes higher. I went to Boise State, and now I'm at CWI. I'm at a place where I'm going to make our grandchildren proud. I'm less worried about grandma and grandpa.
But it's really interesting what you're saying about the students here too. And you put something together that maybe I hadn't thought about in this way quite. Going to college is a commitment, no matter what, and especially if we're talking about like a first-generation student who's making that leap into college. But is it that the two-year school, it allows that commitment to be maybe a little bit more manageable and maybe a little bit less daunting? I mean, it's not as expensive. There's not as much of a time commitment. It's 2 years versus 4. It's closer to home. I mean, you can stay home and take classes. You can work the classes around a work schedule as well. Is it that? I mean, is it making it more accessible? Is it creating more pathways for students by making the commitment more feasible?
Yes, is my short answer. I think my longer answer is that many of us in higher ed, and most of us in decision-making capacities, if you really look forensically, we come out of 4-year residential, in many cases, more liberal arts center of gravity institutions, and in an era that doesn't exist today. And so this idea that you have the ability to go take 4 dedicated or 5 dedicated years, not working, truly investing in a residential-based education, which is wonderful, by the way. It's a great experience. But if you really understand, I believe there is a far larger population in this country that today life is far more complicated. They don't have that ability to step out of life for that moment, and they're going to need at best to consume the benefits of higher education over time and over a lifetime. And it may involve mixing and intermixing employment with that education. And it's not going to look like what it used to. And so that's, yes, what we've specialized in at the community college level and at CWI is, education designed around that complexity. 1/3 of our students are over 24. We are very geographically centered around metropolitan Boise. We don't aspire to serve students in Reno or Vegas or Phoenix. We're really dedicated to this metro area. And so we are a commuter school. We allow you to live where you are already. You may have a better place to live, and we fit that in. Those 8-week starts, the evening classes, it's year-round running classes. We're designing with advisors who understand the complexity of raising kids while you go to school. And we do have a lot of students who are 18 to 24, but it's really about lifetime learners and lifetime complexity. So I do think that we're a good fit for some of these trends that are today's journey. And that's kind of my message for public higher ed is let's all look in the mirror with 2020 vision. We're not at the county fair where you look in one of those distorted mirrors and you kind of see yourself as you want to, or you kind of wish it was the way we had it, or we're hoping that people remember how great we were. Those aren't strategies, those are reminiscing, and I'll join you in that because I'm a product of those places. But I'm far more pragmatic about where are we today and what's needed and what do people need from us today. And I hear it loud and clear. It is this flexibility, it's affordability, and it's tied to employability. So that's my longer answer to the yes.
Okay. What about the role of the 2-year school as opposed to the 4-year school? And are there places where the two can collaborate and cooperate?
Well, the answer is absolutely. I mean, I think I've been a big fan of when research universities are really firing on all cylinders. There's a reason in this country research universities have co-located undergraduate and graduate and faculty research all on one campus. And I would argue that the benefit to the undergraduate experience, which much of our podcast here and this series is, I think, centered around the undergrad as opposed to that graduate student. But frankly, when you put undergraduates in proximity to research, I would argue that benefit that's not achievable at the community colleges, because we don't do research, is that you're going to get exposed to cutting edge ideas, cutting edge insights. That's why we do that. Otherwise, universities should go create research parks that could be 30 miles away to 300 miles away. There are other benefits to research as well. But what I think is important is that our research universities should be aggressive about ensuring those cutting edge learnings are front and center in the undergraduate educational offerings that are there. And, my litmus test has always been, when I've been in the 4 years, is, the way we know we're living that is, frankly, the undergraduate course catalog. What percent of courses are new in the last 5 years that are new in terms of original research, or are we teaching things that are just general information that frankly anybody could be teaching, and it's not coming even from our own faculty. Now, I love faculty combining with other ideas. That's not what I'm saying, but that's where research universities game on. That's where we celebrate that. So to answer your question now more fully, to me, collaboration starts with the idea that we can get the students who come to places like CWI who are interested in transferring, and I can get them to a research-informed, unique major that is specific to those schools. I think that is an incredible combination. We get the general education done, and then they're moving on to that arena where those 4-year universities are truly, you can't find it anywhere else. It's distinctive. So, for example, we do ag and horticulture at a 2-year level for individuals that either want to transfer on. We work really closely and have articulation agreements with the University of Idaho. What better partner? The research coming out of U of I around ag and all those areas, second to none, I would argue. And that's something we celebrate. We promote that. You can get there. Some students do want to go to the job market, and so we have preparation for that. So that's one example. That's some of how I think about that collaboration. But that to me is in its best form, what that looks like. But I want to be clear, 2 years and 4 years in their perfect fashion really occupy unique spaces. And that is a key component, and we should be all part of an ecosystem. Where the friction occurs is when we confuse sort of what our specialties are, mm-hmm. and we either leave our local serving mindset, or we lose sight of what we do really well.
And one area of friction that we saw a few months ago was with CWI's proposal for its first 4-year program. This is the Bachelor of Applied Science in Business Administration. Boise State opposed the idea. The state board narrowly approved it. There was some tension about why a 4-year program at CWI. Talk us through why a 4-year program at CWI and why this was an important program to pursue and kind of where things stand on the program as well.
Sure. Yeah, no, and I'm happy to. I think the first thing I want everyone to know is, obviously, as you've reported, this is one instance where disagreements got public, and I'm a big believer. And I believe in transparency. I'm very comfortable. I want people to know and be informed and be educated. So I appreciate and have no problem with any of that. I will say, higher ed institutions in Idaho disagree all the time. So not all of it's reported, and there is friction that occurs all over the place. And so I don't want anyone to think that this was just, unthinkable and unfathomable that two institutions might disagree. And Boise State and CWI have a wonderful relationship to this day. That being said, I think as you reported and those people that followed it, I think there was a disagreement on how we see maybe each other, or maybe it springboards off my prior answer. Some listeners might say, well, that 4-year degree is an example of you getting off focus, off what you do. And others may say, no, maybe there's more to it. I would say this, what we've talked about is two things. One, at CWI, I don't think we serve, by and large, the same students at all. We're a commuter school. We have a third of our students are over 24. Our 4 years, for the most part, are very residential-centric institutions. Just look at the data, look at who comes, look at the census. While they do offer commuter options, at the end of the day, the centrality of the focus is a more 18 to 24-year-old and or online only. And we're in-person commuter. That flexible learner I mentioned, 8-week starts, teaching into the night, is a much more common and invested model at a CWI. So I would argue, first and foremost, I think we're talking about different students. Okay. But second of all, and more philosophically, I don't believe higher ed in this climate of rapid change, we have to revisit some of the ways we think of ourselves and each other. And often in higher ed, many of us will think of places by like, oh, what types of degrees do they offer, as almost like a definition of what you are. And I think that's a really poor way of evaluating institutions that have to really reflect on the pace of change and who we are. We should all be looking at ourselves saying, wait a minute, am I defined by the artifacts of what I've historically done? I do AA degrees and other schools do BA degrees. Is that really a defensible position, or is that just a shorthand way of historically describing us? I would argue the core competency of the CWIs of the world and community colleges overall, I would argue it's that we teach generally available higher ed information. We don't do research, but we sure teach well English 101, math, calculus. In fact, I share many faculty with Boise State who are adjuncts at both institutions, teaching in some cases the same exact class. So when it came to the 4-year degree you're referencing, two things. One is general business was the area that we've been approved for. That is not a research intensive major. That's a general. That's by definition, it's called general business. Nobody's winning a Nobel Prize. This is all commonly available theory and information. And I would argue that a place like CWI is a perfectly legitimate, if not perfect, place for generals to be taught. In fact, I think over 160 community colleges in this country are doing applied bachelor degrees in states like Texas and Florida, but also California and New York. So pick your flavor of state. You'll see that many of them have recognized that population that's served and the kind of schools we are perfectly appropriate for it. And the last thing I'd say is we are an applied degree, and many people listening may say, well, how's that different than a BA or a BS? You're a BAS. What that is in our curriculum is you're taking a number of classes that are career technical oriented. They may be in a trade related field or a healthcare related field that the 4 years don't do applied education. They're not as, let me reframe this. There are some applied degrees being offered by 4-year degrees, but if you were to subscribe to the theory that we do AAs and 4 years do BAs, then you would probably believe that applied education occurs at the 2-year, not at the 4-year. And if you can see my logic chain, what I'm saying is our career technical education actually is our lane historically. And so that's part of the curriculum, and that makes it more of a applied degree that you would see a community college doing in the 4-year arena. So I just applied 2 different logic streams to it, but I want to try to reiterate that really I think our disagreement that got public had more to do with, should schools like ours even offer a 4-year degree? And it was a Boise State opinion we shouldn't. But ultimately, our state board approved it, and this fall 25, we are expecting to go live once we get our last regulatory approval that's due from the U.S. Department of Education. So that's how I would describe it. I'm happy to go deeper, but that's where we were.
But a lot of what drives the decision to go into this particular 4-year degree is demand in the community, demand in the employment sector. And I suspect that may be a factor down the road in other fields where there's high demand for graduates.
Yeah, and I apologize. I answered a little more on a philosophical level of how we ended up there. I was remiss. We wouldn't be doing this if there wasn't an exceptional demand in Southwest Idaho where we sit. Department of, I think, Workforce Development Council or Department of Labor data had over 10,000 job openings that require a bachelor's of business, undefined. This was not marketing or supply chain, which, by the way, are majors we're thrilled the 4 years are doing. That presumably is research intensive. And so to be clear, any argument that this is duplicative in the definition of there's not enough students or anybody would want this, you're just slicing 100 majors into 50 each is, I think, a false logic. The data suggests there is more demand than any one institution can meet. And again, we can bring some people who might not normally have access to that major now to have access and bring them into the labor market. I do think, yes, to your point, we have been open with the state board that we do not expect to be doing dozens of majors at the 4-year level. This is a very discrete, more of a sharpshooter approach at where need is. But I like to be predictable. It would most likely be in these general areas and in areas where there's high labor demand. So could healthcare be there? Absolutely. Education, if it's a way to offer rural educators trained, perhaps that's an area. They're not currently ones that we have in front of the state board. We're very comfortable and want to be deliberate. But most of all, we want to do what we do well and serve as many people who need it. And that's really what motivates us. It's not about one institution against another.
Let me shift gears because you mentioned the facilities projects that you've got in the works. And I definitely wanted to spend a few minutes getting a sense of what's going on. A lot happening on the Nampa campus. I mean, the health and science project, but the horticulture side, the student learning hub. Walk us through all of those and where they stand and how is that all going to kind of reshape that campus?
Yeah, and we, as I mentioned earlier, have served over 31,000 unique individuals last 12 months. 15 years old. My predecessor did everything he could to meet that tidal wave of demand that has continued to show durability and growth. What that required, and I think was most likely a strategic move, I wasn't at the institution at the time, but involved signing a lot of leases, trying to find teaching space that could be appropriate or acceptable. What we've ended up with is kind of a sprinkled approach. If you know the artist Jackson Pollock, it's kind of like just a paintbrush of paint little spots that have strung from the penitentiary in Boise all the way out towards Caldwell of rented space. And that has been the best solution we were able to do. But we also have 100 acres in Nampa, very centrally located for access in terms of population distribution in the Treasure Valley, and with one academic building that was sort of part of that land. And I believe both the fiscally prudent thing to do, but also the smart educational and academic thing to do is to have teaching space that is co-located. It is not, I believe, where we want to be to have students going to one class over on Overland Street in Boise for one class in healthcare, then having to get in a car and drive 30 to 45 minutes, depending on traffic, all the way out to the Caldwell-Nampa border, where there's another class that they have to take, because we don't have the ability to co-locate programs, classes, let alone other student resources. Our library requires a commute for students to go. If you want to go to the library and a student advisor, you have to go between two places. Our ag and horticulture is in non-ADA compliant buildings that are over in Boise that's rented. So the idea, I think, to bring together is critical. Anonymous learning is not acceptable. I don't think that is a standard that even a lean two-year model should aspire to. But I do think that a discrete investment is warranted here. And so we are building out in Nampa right now. We have an agriculture and horticulture complex that is going to bring indoor-outdoor teaching space. It's going to bring both crops. It's got a barn for various animals that can help us support I happen to know from a couple of years ago, over $500 million in ag exports comes out of Canyon County. And we have an economy that can be supported with that. A student learning hub where bringing together our library, advising, financial aid, where students can have a meal. Right now, we just have a vending machine. You grab a candy bar. That's not a place where you could really end up getting to know a classmate between classes. Health and science building where we're doubling the capacity for our nurse teaching, which is one of the issues we talked about earlier. That can bring all of our health programs together, or most of them right now in phase 1 and all of them in phase 2, to that location. It's going to be a much more valuable and still affordable approach. Boise is a different project, but is that enough, Kevin, or do you want me to go through sort of the fundraising and other things?
Gives me a sense of where you are right now on those 3 projects. Do you see more down the road on the Nampa campus? And then I do want to talk about Boise some more.
Right now, this is kind of the first wave. I think bringing our healthcare, we have such a demand for skilled workers for healthcare. And for those listening, we do everything from RN nursing to all of the direct care, many of the direct care professions that start at a more entry pay level of like certified nurse assistants, individuals in high demand in our nursing homes, our retirement communities, our hospitals. These are people bringing tremendous compassion to those maybe listening or family members of ours. It's critical that we want nurses that aren't overseeing large census numbers of patients where I may only see that nurse far less frequently than we would all desire. And so we want to be preparing more of those, and in contemporary learning spaces, not least spaces that weren't really designed for teaching healthcare type environments. So right now that's healthcare, ag and horticulture, and getting some of our fundamental student services together in one location. More could be coming. It is 100 acres. There's still a lot of grass, and I don't think we were formed to just cut grass every week. We were formed to bring the benefits of education to lifetime of opportunities. So more certainly could be coming, but right now this is fairly ambitious. It's over $100 million of construction, and at the same time, I think it's really needed. I'm the big believer in keeping it lean, but you got to have a campus to start with, and that's what we're doing now.
Got a lot of green grass in Nampa. You've also got a fairly large footprint of asphalt, blacktop in Boise near the river. I drive by every day. I see the signs. What's going to happen on that campus, and what's the timetable there?
So our plans for Boise have always been to have that CWI presence in Boise. Many people here know of that property. It's at Whitewater in Maine. It's roughly 11 acres, I think slightly under that. We are very much a believer in that location and in the visible and teaching and educational presence in both Boise and in Nampa, which we are supported by the taxpayers of Ada and Canyon County. And it's critical that we have that physical presence. We are very committed to that commuter model and in-person affordable education. And we do online, but in-person matters in this community. Our plan is to have that public-private partnership there. We have Alquist as the development partner. And our vision for CWI is to have a vibrant building where we're most likely going to have our business programs. We've talked about this, our IT, cyber, business, the proximity to internships with some of the employers in that urban environment. And at the same time, it's great accessibility to hop onto 184 and then 84 to access some of our employers that run along that corridor for that applied experience. We're a big believer, by the way, at CWI for both learning in the classroom and then out on the job. And so we think that's a great location for that. We also expect there to be what I'm calling our urban education center. We have a large number of individuals who are retooling or reskilling for their life or jumpstarting their life anew. And that could be everything from refugees to individuals who have had a disruption in their life. You might have read that we've run a construction program for individuals over at the Interfaith Sanctuary, which is soon to be or eventually to be off State Street, helping individuals maybe start their careers in construction industries. We have a large number, hundreds of individuals who are in Boise and close to Boise who have arrived from other countries who have skills, they've been trained, but may not have English. And we have multiple hundreds, close to 1,000 individuals taking English as a second language. We think this location is going to give that access for these learners to have a much easier access to get to us. We have public transit connectivity. And at the same time, our partner will have a vibrancy in that community. That could be some retail, that could be some amenities. For some individuals, they may find that location good for some of the housing that may come online. And that is where we've been working with Alquist to have the right, there's a lot of shifting parts here. If anybody who reads national news knows or takes out a mortgage knows, mortgage rates have changed. We've asked the developer, we do want to have and anticipate growth at CWI. And so we are setting aside some of that land for some additional potential growth, which could look like someday in the future, another building for us, so that we're not landlocking ourselves in. We see that as a vibrant node in our campus community. But right now, timing is looking like people always want to know when's somebody going to be in a building rather than when do we put a shovel in the ground. It's looking like fall of 27 for us. But it is, higher ed has always been what I call a slow motion action thriller. So I know for many people, they're thinking, gosh, when is this going to start? Where are you? I assure you, much like writing a term paper, there's much work going on, and we're trying to make sure we measure twice and cut once. That's how I describe it, because it's such a beautiful and perfect location that we want to make sure we do it to the best of our ability.
And you have so much in progress here, both on the Nampa campus and the Boise campus. The two things that aren't part of this discussion right now that are things that people tend to think about when they think about college: dormitories, residential facilities for students, and athletics. Neither are right now in the equation right now. Is that completely off the table, both of those, or is there a scenario where either of those become part of CWI's mission?
Well, I would start off with, look, I never say never. So I don't think anything needs to be viewed as a fixed mindset. I'm always someone who likes to believe that new information leads to new frameworks. I too am a curious and adaptable individual. I would say this though, right now, I think I believe that we are best serving our community by being laser focused on affordable, employable education for all who are interested. And when you're able to spend for virtually every degree we do less than $10,000 and end up employed at $50,000 to $100,000 coming out after 2 years or less, that is a stellar service to individuals and to our employers and the community overall. So, in knowing that we are within roughly 35 miles of most everybody we serve, with relationships with public transit for those that are willing to give it a try, we are a terminus and an origination point for bus routes in Nampa. We will have that connectivity in our Boise node and campus. I have felt that residency right now, because of the density of our more rather than less urban, allows us to stay focused on allowing people to choose where they want to live. Oftentimes, that may be more affordable than having to kind of locate right when you can walk to campus. It's look at rents that are 3 miles away from Boise State versus a quarter mile and in. It gets more expensive the closer you get, and I want to give people that flexibility and stay commuter oriented. So I'm sorry for the long-winded there, but right now I am more centered on that commuter-based model and keeping that affordability high because of that. I do draw that correlation. Athletics is an interesting one. I do think that we have parts of our community at CWI that see that as both wonderful way to engage students, to have civic engagement. It's entertainment. It's a way for students to really marry co-curricular learning with curricular. But I also want to be very sensitive to that affordability. I care first and foremost about affordable, employable education for all. So our ability to do that, I think I'm slightly more in the middle on this, and I'm just sharing this with vulnerability. But I think if we do it, I want to make sure it's not intended to be a financial burden on the institution. It is very hard today at the four-year level to keep up with the rising cost and the competitive nature. It almost takes a life of its own on. And I want to turn to most, if not all of our donors to say, let's talk about helping students get that economic empowerment. Let's get a skilled workforce out and see where the philanthropy is motivated there. I think that it may be in our future, but it's still something we're figuring out. But we are the otters, by the way. So.
You've got the mascot, but there are a lot tougher decisions to make down the road beyond picking a mascot, it sounds like.
Yeah, and I would just say this. I think what I would, right now, my view is I would invite, when that day comes, if it comes, and our board would have to vote on this, I would expect we would be turning to our community that's most interested in this and saying, join us up front in affording this. We have a chance if we did it. We want to know the community's got our back rather than saying we wish you would do it, but we assume you have the money.
Yeah, good luck with that.
That's a harder pill to swallow with my view on CWI and higher education.
Well, President Jones, we have gone through an hour, and I feel like we covered a lot of questions and a lot of the ones I wanted to get to, and really good conversation. I appreciate your time as always, and thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Kevin. And I would just say, anybody listening, I hope you find this informative. And if not, find a way to get to me, and I'd be happy to engage either through myself or one of my colleagues more on this topic. And thanks for being interested. To you, Kevin, Thanks to all the sponsors, and I just appreciate that chance to chat with everyone.
Thank you again. And this wraps up the Boise Metro Chamber of Commerce's Higher Education Series. We've had 3 of these really great conversations. I really enjoyed all 3 of the guests we've had and the conversations we've had with Robert Wagner at Idaho State University, Lisa Roberts at the Boise School District, and today Gordon Jones from the College of Western Idaho. Thank you again to Sparklight, sponsor for this series, and thank you all for joining us. And hope you enjoyed the conversation. I hope we can do this something like this again down the road.